Hello, in today's episode we're going to be talking about Dalton-on-Tees Roman Villa. Welcome back. I am actually really passionate about villas and I absolutely love talking about them. Not because of the villa buildings, but because of everything around them. Now, in the northeast of England, we don't have too many villas. In fact, because we're near a military frontier zone, you get far less. And so there's a few villas that I want to focus upon in these episodes, and I'm going to be talking about the one at Dalton-on-Tees. So this was discovered in the 90s because of aerial photography, which is really amazing because what you do is obviously you can do it today yourself. You could just go on Google Maps, just look around and look for crop marks, look for things on the ground, and you then combine it with LiDAR. And when you do that, you can really get a sense of what's going on in the surrounding landscape. It's something that I really enjoy, and it's something I did as a part of my degree during my master's at Newcastle University. So with this, the Dalton-on-Tees villa was discovered, and so then they started looking around and assessing the local area. It's on a scarp of land about 50 metres away from the Tees, 35 metres above the river. So it's a really good area, good drainage, and it's also in a very fertile part of the landscape. Now, the nearby village has a medieval moated site, which is probably like a manor house, and it has fish ponds connected to it, but the modern village is definitely an extension of Darlington. So that was where people would live, and then they would go into Darlington to work and come back again. Now, originally with this villa, what you find is it's developed over time. It started and was discovered basically as a ditched area with two buildings. Now, when they started off, you have to do some assessment before you can even get to digging. You have to do stuff like looking at the layout. If you're lucky, you can do some ground penetrating radar, things like that. And then on top of that as well, you then also do field walking, which is in the basic essence, the most basic form of archaeology you can do. You start walking across a field and then you log what you find and where you found it. So they found glass, pottery, metal slag, from iron, from copper, from lead, and that they basically showed them that there was something going on here, especially Roman. Something Roman was going on at the site. Then they started excavating and they discovered three different buildings. The first building was the villa. Now this is a classic winged corridor villa. It was referred to as building A, and a winged corridor villa is where you have one building with a corridor along it and the rooms come off the corridor. Then at a later point they put two wings on the front, which is sort of like extensions to the front of the building that make the building look grander. So that's the beginning of the actual building. And you have this quite grand building with a wonderful frontage on it, and that's a winged corridor villa. It's quite a large one as well. It's about 30 metres by 17 metres. Now when I say quite a large one, I mean for northern Britain. When you look at some of these villas, they're absolutely massive. And when you look at the imperial ones across in the continent, they just, some of the British ones should just be referred to as cottages in contrast to some of the massive villas you see across in Europe where the emperors were living. You know, they're insane, especially like you look at modern day surviving ones like the Emperor Hadrian's villa across in Italy. These are insanely huge structures. Now, when you have building A, the building was used for a long period of time, probably anywhere from the 2nd century AD, so probably late 2nd century, right the way through probably until the 3rd or 4th century AD. Now what was confusing was the northwest wing of the villa. In the later phases, the ground of the villa had been burnt, and there was Iron Age pottery, or like pottery that is very much associated with the Iron Age in northern Britain, found upon the floor in the final deposition layers. Now, to me, the possibility that what you're looking at there is that people were using the native pottery style inside the building in its later phases, which could suggest that maybe at the end of the Roman period, people are now coming inside and you haven't got access to maybe the Roman supply routes or stuff like that, so they're making pottery in the local style, but it's been identified as Iron Age, which therefore then throws out some of the chronology on the building. But that's some of the ways I look at it, that basically a native tradition is being used in the building, but the building's being used maybe after the end of Roman Britain. Again, you'd have to look at the archaeology report, the stratigraphy, and really understand what's going on throughout the period, but that's my gut feel on it. Now the second building is the one I'm almost more passionate about, and this building here is an aisled hall. Now aisled halls are where you build a massive structure, and it's the same size as the villa. It's 30 meters by 17 meters. But inside you put massive pillars down the center to create an aisle, and then when you have it, it's normally a 2-story building. Now when you have this aisled hall, it's normally referred to, and traditionally in literature they've always been understood as barns. And when they've been understood as barns, you've got this large barn building which is supposed to store all the produce from the villa site. Now in the later period, in the 3rd and 4th century throughout Britain, they start getting modified, and this one here is modified as well. What happens is they put 2 wings on it as well to make it look just like the villa. So when it's made to look like the villa, it becomes more aggrandized. And then the back wall, what happens is you have 1 apse of it, so it's a curved area, but then it gets modified to make 3 little apses, which is possibly either a bathhouse, so that you would find the Romans would add apses to buildings, so that when you have moisture inside, the water would drip down, or if it was hot air, the moisture would collect into the dome, would drip down the side, and then you could collect it all again, and it would stop mildew and other stuff like that building up inside. Really quite clever. The other possibility is it could be a shrine, so you'd have like 3 shrines inside the building. Now what you find is in these aisled halls in the 3rd and 4th century is that they start getting additions, so you get grain dryers, bathhouses, stuff like that. And the possibility is that you have the villa owner inside his grand villa, and people of a social status similar to him are meeting him in there. But when he needs to go and meet his farm workers, he doesn't meet them inside of his grand building, or he only meets them in the entrance hall. So instead he goes across the aisled hall, and this is where, you know, it's almost like their meeting space. So for the normal people on the site, that's where they gather inside the aisled hall. It's an agricultural space, and it's also their downtime space in the villa complex. So that's another option there, that you have that separation of, you know, space between the more important elements of society and those who are seen as less important, or the powerful and the not so powerful. So really interesting one right there, and that's why I find aisled halls almost more exciting than the villas, because I'm just like, this is where normal people are interacting, and it's also where power is displayed between the 2 people. And a lot of the time these aisled halls sometimes survive longer than the villas, so that's a cool one right there. Then there was a 3rd building, building C, and this was unexcavated, but it's about 20 meters long. So that could be agricultural buildings, or it could be a second aisled hall. So when the first aisled hall is aggrandized and turned into something that looks like a winged villa, there could be that they moved a lot of the agricultural processing to the 3rd building, building C. But with that, it's been unexcavated. So until they excavate that, we won't know. But this is what makes the Dalton-on-Tees site really interesting, because you've got the villa, the aisled hall, and then you've got the 3rd building, and they form a C shape within a ditched enclosure. And what you find is with a lot of British villas, they're within ditched enclosures, so there's again a delineation of space between the villa complex and what's outside of it. So you have an inside and an outside space. There was possibly another building which was described as octagonal, and in northern Britain as well you sometimes find these circular buildings, and they're often seen as mills, because there would be 2-story buildings, and you'd have an ox that would then walk around inside, and that would move a millstone grinding the grain, which would be from the obviously villa site. And the other alternative as well is an octagonal building could also be a mausolea. It could be, you know, that could be a burial site for the villa owners, and again another important focal point, because that would where the villa owners' ancestors were buried. More likely than not, though, it could be more likely that it is the grain processing, because we find that on so many of the villa sites in the north, suggesting again that they are important for the processing and the production of foodstuffs that may be for the military or for export to the continent, because that's 2 things we see going on in the later Roman period. So that's why I love sharing this. This is just a small villa site compared to some of the ones down south. The ones in the southwest of England are absolutely massive in the late Roman period. But this is just a small villa site, but it's interesting to me because obviously it's in the north of Britain, and alongside that as well, it's got an aisled hall that was modified and shows that change in situations. And just obviously in the Tees Valley is so close to Hadrian's Wall, northern Britain, that military area, and what's going on in there in the Roman period. and the possibility of it surviving on into the post-Roman period with native pottery turning up inside the villa as well, which for me is just fascinating because of my love of that end of the Roman period, start of the early medieval period transition, which is my passion. Anyway, I'd love to know what you think. Post it down in the comments, comment down there, let's have an interaction, see what you think and have a chat. Alongside that as well, if you haven't already subscribed, please do subscribe because it helps the channel grow, and I absolutely love sharing this history with people, so you're helping me do it. And if you'd like to support me further, I also have a Ko-fi account and a Patreon account down in the description, which means I can dedicate time to producing these videos, and that helps me no end as well. So thank you if you have done so. Finally, I look forward to seeing you in another video in the near future, but until then, stay safe and well, and thank you so much for joining me.